Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights, with LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today, we're speaking with a cinematographer. Her credits include Life in a Year, Palm Springs, and the TV series Brothers. We're pleased to welcome Quyen Tran. Quyen, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, welcome.
Oh my gosh, this is an honor, a dream, and a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We'd like to start with the question, how did you get to where you are today? Were you a kid that always thought of things in frames, or did you decide that you were going to be a vet and then find this later? What's your story?
The latter. It was not a vet. It was a doctor. I think growing up Asian, as you may know from many stereotypes, it's like you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a teacher. Or you're going to, have a real profession. And so that was kind of my path in the beginning. My oldest, I have 5 siblings. They're all not in the industry. I'm the black sheep in the family, but my oldest sister was studying to be a doctor. My next older sister is a teacher. And then when it came down to me, I was like, what do I do? I guess I'll follow in the footsteps of my oldest sister, who I'm very close with, and I'll just be a doctor. No big deal. And so I was pre-med at university in undergrad. And while I was in organic chemistry, I was like, this is not for me. I just have no passion about it. I love chemistry. I love science. And that goes into my baking and my cooking. I'm an avid cook and baker. So there's a lot of kitchen science there. But as far as making a profession, I was like, no, thank you. This is not for me. So I took a lot of classes in art, studio art and painting and photography. And I was in a cappella. I don't know if that's actually how I met Sam, my husband. We met in college. I was music director of the a cappella group, and he was the president of his. And one day we're like, let's sing a duet. That's another story. It's pretty dorky. But I went to undergrad business school. I was at the University of Virginia, and they have a 2-year commerce school. So I was like, I'll just do this because I'm not really into studying medicine anymore. I'm not going to be good at it because my heart's not in it. So I studied business, and I was like, well, maybe I can do this. I can study business and then use my business knowledge to further my career in whatever else I decide to do. Because I was still undecided. UVA is a very liberal arts school, and I studied, mythology, and I studied Italian, and I don't want to say useless things, but things that I really was passionate about. But upon graduation, I went to work for Deloitte & Touche. It's like accounting and finance. It's like the furthest thing from art. But it made my parents happy, even though I was incredibly miserable. Uh-huh. Yeah. And so while I was working in D.C. at Deloitte, I took photography classes. So I wasn't one of those kids that was born with a Bolex in hand. So I was studying photography to inform my paintings. And that's when I fell in love with being in the darkroom, and I would print on fiber, and I would process all my own film. And I love pushing Tri-X in Ilford, like 2 stops, and watching it, develop in the fumes. I really love that smell. I do miss that. I do miss that.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah.
Right? And so after my stint at Deloitte, I moved to New York City to be with my partner, with Sam. And while we were there, I continued my studies in photography, and I worked part-time. I was on what was called a flexible work arrangement. So I worked 3 days at Deloitte, and then the other 4 days I worked as a photojournalist for the Downtown Express and some small papers and freelancing here and there. And now we get into like it's hard to talk about because it's a very traumatic experience in my life, but 9/11 happened, and that kind of changed the trajectory of my entire life, not just my career. Because my photos of that event, so we were living, just a little backstory, we were living in the Battery Park City apartments, which are located still across the street from what was the Marriott at the time. And I was working in World Trade 7. And that morning we were right there. Like you could throw a stone from our 18th story apartment window. And I was late that day because I could literally walk there in 2 minutes. So I would leave at like 8:58. This is how much I love my job. So I in the first plane hit at 8:55. So I think it was 8:52 or 8:55. I can't remember now. It's been a long time. Anyway, so we heard the plane crash, and we both looked at each other and we're like, "What was that sound?" And I said, "I think it sounded like a ship like ran into the harbor, right?" And so I ran to the window. We had west-facing windows, and I think we're in the corner, and east-facing windows as well. Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but yeah, north and east-facing windows. So we looked out the north, and we didn't see anything. We looked down into the courtyard right outside World Trade 7 and just saw people start running around. And we're like, what's going on? So we ran to the east-facing windows. I grabbed my camera, and it was loaded with Tri-X film on my little Nikon. And yes, I am a Nikon shooter. And I look out the window, and I look up at the World Trade Centers, and I see smoke billowing from the North Tower. And I start taking pictures when I hear the sound, and it sounded like an airplane. And I put my camera down for a second, and I saw the second plane go into the South Tower. And the heat from that explosion blew me back from the window.
Wow.
And, I'm thinking, okay, this is not normal. That first plane, they were like, was it a commuter plane? Was it an accident? But at this point, my husband and I were like, my boyfriend, he asked me, what did it look like? And I said, that was definitely a commuter jet. So weird. This is not a normal thing. And so I started taking pictures, and that's when we got a phone call from my husband's father, who is a rocket scientist, and he's very smart. And he said, you guys need to get out of there. Those towers are going to collapse. And we're like, oh, no, they're not going to. They're the World Trade Centers. That's impossible. But sure enough, he was like, get out of there. So all I grabbed was my camera, 2 more rolls of film. And I was wearing like an orange tank top and khaki shorts. I remember that very well. And we ran down. We were smart enough to not take the elevator. So we ran down 18 flights of steps. And as soon as we hit the bottom floor, that's when we heard a rumbling and then a cloud of dust come towards us. And that was the collapse of the South Tower. And we had no idea what was happening. We were stepping over things, and I saw everything. I saw, all the people jumping, and it was really horrible. Sorry, I don't really talk about this much. But it's very relevant because it was the reason why I became a filmmaker. So we ran, and we got out of there. We got on a ferry, went to Jersey. I took more photos. It was insane. A week later, we returned to the apartment. It was completely, it's just ashes everywhere and debris from the plane. I took a bunch of photos, which it's bittersweet because they kind of launched my photography. Like I made it onto the front page of every newspaper. So it's very bittersweet, right? And like this young person who has these grotesque images of my apartment in ruins, covered in dust and debris. And so for another 2 years, I worked for newspapers and worked as a photojournalist. I quit my job at Deloitte & Touche. And during that time, my husband was producing short films at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go on those sets and be the stills photographer. And I was like, this is so cool. Look at that. What's that? That's slate. And then like they let me clap the slate. And I was like, this is so fun. And I was just in awe of the magic, right? And so I decided, what if I just apply to film school? Because now I'm going to rewind a little bit in my story. I had a very visceral memory of my childhood, and it was seeing E.T. And that was like, I think that was, I can't remember if we saw it in theaters or not. My family was very poor growing up. We were raised on food stamps, and we were sponsored by a Catholic family. And my parents were refugees from Vietnam and came over during the fall of Saigon. And so we had nothing but the sponsorship of this amazing Catholic family. Her name was Mrs. Martin, and she became my godmother after I was born. And, well, she was actually also my foray into baking, because every time I went to her house, it smelled so amazing. And so that's where my love of baking blossomed. But I'll get to that later. So early on, my family not speaking any English. I grew up, only in a Vietnamese-speaking household. Even to this day, I only speak Vietnamese. To my parents. Every time my parents call, I start speaking Vietnamese, and my friends are like, "Oh my gosh, like we had no idea." I was like, "Oh yeah, I, speak, whatever Vietnamese." But one thing that we did as a family was watch some TV shows. And do you remember the show I Love Lucy?
Of course, of course.
So that was the other show, I don't want any judgment here, but was Benny Hill. Not appropriate for kids, but...
yeah, right, yeah.
Now that's funny.
That is funny.
It's big in England.
But I think the reason why my parents gravitated toward those shows was because it was situational comedy. And you didn't need to understand the language in order to understand the story. It was all visual storytelling, all situational comedy, and you have these brilliant performers. I still remember like the episodes where Lucille Ball is stuffing her face with chocolates, or she's like stomping on the grapes. I mean, it's
grapes.
It's, very, very life transformative memories. And so that was kind of my first memory of like what visual storytelling could do. As an Asian person in my household, at least, we're very suppressed in our emotions. We, even to this day, I don't even say like I love you to my parents or my siblings. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't want this to become a therapy session, but
that's also very English.
Right.
So I'm quite familiar with that. Yeah.
Well,
anyway, moving on.
Right. Well, we can hash it out together, Roger.
Right.
So we didn't really talk about emotions, and we didn't show our emotions. But when I saw E.T., I cried, and I wanted to be E.T.'s friend. And I put myself in Elliot's shoes, and I realized that I could get lost and emote fully in a place, in a theater, I can't remember if we saw it in the theater or at home. I just remember very clearly feeling all these feelings as a young child and thinking, wow, this is really special. So then we started watching more films, some more appropriate than others. I think I don't think I've seen The Shining since, because I was so traumatized as a child. And The Exorcist, like I still have not revisited those films, because those images are burned into my mind forever. Very traumatic. But just knowing how compelling that visual storytelling could be, I then, in high school, in 9th grade, they were offering a one-time like film course, and it was like film studies. I was the only freshman in the class, and it was full of drama folks, and they were all like seniors. I was like the only freshman in there. But I just remember, wow, this is life-changing. Like, I love cinema. But then I kind of, like the memory of watching E.T., like the memory of enjoying I Love Lucy with my family, I kind of banked those memories. And I didn't revisit them until my 20s, when I was on set again. And then after the events of 9/11, then realizing maybe I can do something with this, and maybe I can work through those traumas by being in film, so that I can make people feel the things I felt when I was a child watching those pictures for the first time. So then we moved to UCLA. I went to film school at UCLA, where...
Why UCLA?
Well, I got...
You were in New York.
I was in New York. Well, I think we wanted to get away. I think because of 9/11 and those events, it was very traumatizing, and we kind of wanted a fresh start. And Sam's sister is a amazing editor, Tatiana Regal. She was like, come to California, move out here. So I applied to UCLA and got into AFI UCLA, decided to go to UCLA because I wasn't quite sure what path I would take, whether it would be directing or cinematography. But I loved my meeting with Bill McDonald. As you know, he's incredible. He's been a massive influence in my life. And I got to meet you both at UCLA 20 years ago. My God.
Yeah, believe it.
And that's where I pursued my studies and kind of reinvigorated my love for cinema and moving pictures.
And when you finished there, how did you find work? What was your path then?
I took any job I could. At the time, I think like it was like the HVX and the 5D were making a splash. So one of my friends was starting up a commercial business. And so we would go and shoot all these little projects together, like athletes. It was for Nike, was one of his clients. So we did all these little videos back when that was popular. And I also, because of my photojournalistic background, I fell in with a couple documentary filmmakers. I'm not sure if you know Grace Lee. She's very active in the documentary world. And we shot this movie called American Revolutionary, the Grace Lee Boggs Project, which was very life-changing for me as well. Just working on that project for over 7 years and going to Detroit and just meeting all these amazing activists and influencers. And before that term became a thing, it also introduced me to gardening, which is a big part of my life too. But
Gardening and baking.
And baking, who knew? And so,
but why? I want to ask you, why cinematography though? Why did you go in the direction with a camera rather than directing?
Well, I wrote and directed a couple short films while I was at UCLA, but I kept getting hired as a DP because most of my director friends weren't getting jobs. So I was like, I'll just do this because I'm making money and I'm getting jobs and I'm seeing all my director friends really struggle. And so maybe I was just lazy. I don't know. Maybe it was the easy road out. I don't know. At the time, I just, I felt comfortable because having come from a visual background with art and painting and photography, it was more comfortable for me. And I guess I was really just afraid at the time to direct because I saw my friends struggling. I saw how hard it was to make a living. I don't come from money, so I had to pay my own way through school. And, I'm very grateful for scholarships and to Bill because I had the best time at UCLA. But I'm also practical. That's, I guess, where my business side comes in. I wanted to travel, so I needed to make money. I didn't want to struggle a lot. And so so maybe by default, but also I love visual storytelling and I love taking pictures and I love making images. And I was good at it. So I at the time I was like, I'm going to focus on this now. And I just kept doing that.
Did you feel that shooting documentaries also, it's a learning experience because when you're shooting a documentary, you got to take the shots that are there and you've got a limited amount of time and you have to choose the shot that's going to cut the best. To me, shooting documentaries is a school in and of itself. What did you think?
Absolutely. I can't agree more. There was a lot of cross-training between my documentary and my narrative work. I think, being... Okay, so in documentary, and in photojournalism too, there's two ways. Well, there's more than two ways, but there's ways of capturing the story, right? And I know, Roger, you also worked in documentary earlier on. But you could either be back and zoom in on a telephoto lens, or you can be wider, closer. And my approach to documentary was really getting close with the subjects and making them feel that they could trust me. And so I was always a very active participant in the story with my camera. I didn't talk, mind you, but I was right there in the conversation. If there was a group of people in a circle, I would be in that circle as opposed to like outside the circle, circling, finding it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I learned was listening, because you're shooting and you're listening to the conversation, and you need to know whom to focus on. In a conversation with 3 people, you can you can stay in a 3 shot, but that's not always the most compelling shot. So you have to listen to the conversation and know, okay, this person's talking, but look at the reaction of this person. So I'm going to pan over. I'm going to focus on this person who's listening to this conversation, because that is a more interesting story to tell. And so there's a lot that I learned from documentary that I didn't even realize that I was gleaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it so much because I felt like I was also telling compelling stories. Like I was very choosy about what documentaries I would invest in, because it was so time consuming and there was no pay. Like I would sleep on the couches of, I don't even know where I was sleeping, but like the director and I would just bunk together and share meals together on the go. And oh my God, pick up the camera. Like I think one of the most compelling moments in American Revolutionary, that documentary about Grace Lee, was when Grace said, "Don't record this. We're just going to chat off book." But I had my cans on. I was back there changing a battery, and I heard them talking, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to record this." So I hit record, and I knew she was still mic'd. So I crept around the corner, and I got the conversation. And it's literally like the highlight in the film, because they didn't realize I was recording. I was like, "Am I doing something bad? Am I invading their space?" I directly disobeyed the director, but then she saw me and she like waved me over. I was like, come closer. And I did, and I'm glad I did. But, if not for the cans, I don't know that I would have picked up on that cue. Mm-hmm. So I think even in, if you're shooting like I did this project with John Wells, MAID, and we wanted it to feel very, I hate to say visceral and organic. I'm always trying to find words that are not those,
They're a bit overused, aren't they?
Overused,
yeah. Sometimes there's no alternative, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what's a synonym for that? But I felt like sometimes I know the crew hated this, but I'd be like, can we shoot the rehearsal? Because sometimes things happen, right?
Yeah.
I would never suggest that, because it's hard on everyone. It's hard. But if you have an amazing focus puller and you've lit the space for the space, then I think there's a lot to gain from that, because sometimes you can't redo that performance.
It also depends on the actors, because there are some actors that need several takes before they're up to speed, so it's kind of a waste.
I once worked with Whoopi Goldberg and Sissy Spacek on the same movie, but it was hard to do a 2-shot because Whoopi would only do 2 takes and then say, "Well, I can't give anything else. What do you want?" And Sissy wouldn't really get into it until take 10 or 12.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, what do you do in that situation? Do you have a stand-in perform 11 takes before you're on Sissy's coverage?
A lot of over the shoulders.
Yeah. So you've, in a way, you've taken a lot from documentary work into your feature work, right?
Yeah, I really have. And I still would love to do more docs, but I just, the last couple of years, actually, I've been focusing on directing.
Yeah.
So do you think that directing's going to be your thing? Do you prefer it to shooting?
Oof. I it's hard for me to say because I'm still paying dues to the ASC and 600s. But I don't want to say I'm done with DPing. I absolutely love it, and it's informed who I am as a director. I mean, not just in the technical sense, but, like you, I operate the camera, and that connection to the actors is so special. And there's something that you can't teach to operators sometimes. Either they have it or they don't, and that's intuition. And knowing when, knowing when to push in, if that is going to be in the move, or knowing what angle to be at, and for their eye lines and what have you, knowing where to put the camera at a particular moment. And so as an operator, I became very close with a lot of actors. And I think that's really helped me as I take this, I don't want to say a step up, because I really see it as a side step into directing, because now I have this rapport and this language with actors, and I'm very, very comfortable with them. I'm married to one. But also, like, that training as an operator has really taught me something that I can't even imagine, like, as a director who hasn't come from camera, how they know all the technical. I know you've worked with so many amazing directors.
A lot of directors don't know the technical, and that's why you're there.
Actually,
I mean, it's
surprising
kind of
sometimes,
nice,
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could ask the same for you. It's like, do you want, I mean, many people have asked you, like, do you ever want to direct?
I did at one time, and you always look back and think, well, maybe I could have taken a different path after film school. But, I'm very happy with where I've been, really.
What do you particularly enjoy about directing compared to shooting?
It's working with actors. I really love working with actors. And I think a lot of DPs who think about directing, that's their one thing. They're like, well, I don't know, though, the actor part, I don't know if I could do that. But I'm like, oh, that's the thing I love doing. And it's not only that. I think having the overall vision, right? Because as the director, you can also curate the shots, and you're curating everything, color palette and production design, working with everyone in a different way than you would as a DP. I just love the full collaboration across all departments. And I love the prep part of it as well. There's things as a director that you get to prep and work on that I didn't as a cinematographer, and that's like casting. I love casting. I love rehearsals with the actors and talking about the stories with them. And that's something that I never did as a cinematographer. I didn't have coffee with an actor and talk about, the character's journey. I would love to, but that's just not what we do as DPs. At least not what I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
You've directed a lot of television, too. So how is that different? Because television has such a tight schedule, and the whole structure of showrunner versus director is quite different on a television show. Very
different. Well, I'm currently writing 2 features, which I would love to also direct. I'm not going to DP them. I'll hire an amazing DP. There's so many out there. And that's also another great thing about directing now, is like I get to hire my friends to shoot and collaborate with, and it's so fun. It is so wonderful, and I feel so fortunate right now. So it's just amazing to finally work with the people I've admired for so long. But as DPs, we're never on set with each other. So now in this capacity, I am able to collaborate with so many of the people that I respect and revere.
But again, I was asking about the difference in television.
Yeah. So in television, it's a tight schedule. And when you're a guest director, you're either falling into a look already, and you're adapting to whatever's been established. My first directing job was given to me by none other than our mutual friend, John Wells. And I was filming the pilot of MAID. And during the filming, he turns to me and he says, "You should direct." And I was like, "Oh gosh, am I stepping on your toes?" I was like, I'm sorry. He was like, no. He's like, you're a storyteller. You're a filmmaker. You should think about directing. I was like, okay. Oh, yeah. I used to direct way back in film school. I wrote and directed my short films. And he said, no, you should direct this show. And I think my jaw just dropped because, MAID is a decent sized show, and we had Margaret Qualley and Andy McDowell and Nick Robinson, just really outstanding talent. And I was like, are you actually asking me to direct on this show? Because that's crazy. I'm not in the DGA. I've never directed a legitimate show before. And he fast tracked me into the DGA, and I directed episode 8. And he said, oh yeah, so also a little caveat, you have to shoot the finale with me. And I was like, of course. So we shot the pilot together, and we shot the finale block together, and then he gave me episode 8 to direct. And
what was that like? I mean, as a new experience directing.
Yeah, and what did you take from your work on series as a cinematographer?
Wow, it was incredible because John was such a mentor to me. That show is right up my alley. I'm a big fan of magical realism and these little surrealist moments. So in that show, we built in these little transitions, and I love to do things in camera. And so in that series, John said, I want you to just do what you want. He gave me the freedom to change the look, because I said, John, I have a couple ideas. They're not really within the scope of what we designed in the pilot, but I think for this episode, because it kind of breaks away and there's this moment, I'd love to try something, but it's a bit surreal and maybe a little too, far into that magical realism. He's like, just do it. And I did. And that was Margaret Qualley sinking into the couch. And it was like, we literally designed a couch where she could get pulled into the dark recesses of the couch. And so it was a location show, but the one set build was for that shot, because I was like, okay, I need a wall, and we need to build like a flat with the wall. I'll shoot everything else in situ on the set, and then this reverse shot I'll shoot on stage, because I need to have a special effects and stunts pull her into the couch through the wall so she can disappear. And John was like, go for it. And I was like, really? It's kind of wild. It's kind of outside the language. But he was like, just go for it. And I did. And in the cut, in the edit as well, he said, I want you to deliver the cut that you want. Because in television, if you don't deliver the cut that you see in your head, no one else is going to see your vision for it. So I turned in a cut with all these special moments. And I would say like 50% of them got in, but for me, that was a big win, because I really tried to push the envelope on that.
So yeah, but what did you learn? From shooting series, like I say, you worked on a series called Camping that was very successful, right? With it had some pretty top name actors in it, Jennifer Garner and David Tennant, right?
Yeah.
And then you also worked on a series called A Teacher with Rooney Mara on it. Can you talk about those? What was the process on those, and how did that lead you to believe that you could and should direct?
I didn't. That didn't. None of those led me to believe that I could and should direct. But I working on series, and I shot like the entire series, which is very hard. It's very difficult to not have an alternating, because the prep is non-existent, and you're working, 6-7 day weeks. And oftentimes, because I personally did not want to be unprepared, I would just work on the weekends on my own, just to make sure that I was ready for the next director. And that's really hard, but also you get to maintain the look. For the control freaks out there, you control every shot and every image, and there's a consistency there. But these were limited.
But you were shooting every episode, but the director was changing?
Yeah, you don't really control every shot. Yeah. Sorry, but in television, you've got the showrunner, you've got the director.
There's like a lot of
let's
people
be
involved.
realistic
That's true.
here.
It's more like a commercial.
Yeah.
It's more like a commercial. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's tough, because you're working within this system. And then sometimes certain directors want to do certain things, and then you're kind of stuck in the middle saying, well, this isn't really what we've been doing, but we can try it. It gets a little bit finicky, right? Because you have the showrunner saying, oh, you want to keep it in line, keep it consistent. But then you have the director, and you're trying to, do what the director wants, but then the showrunner saying this. So the DP oftentimes gets stuck with the responsibility of maintaining the look of the show. So that's really mentally, it can be a bit exhausting, honestly, because you want to serve the director, but you also have this responsibility to the studio and to the showrunner. So it's hard.
I think that's a key difference in television, and an important one to note. It's a difficult, you're serving two masters and trying to make everyone happy.
Exactly.
And how much on a show like Camping, for instance, how much was prepared in advance, and how much is you're working instinctively on the day, almost like if you were shooting a documentary?
And would it depend on who the director is?
And how much change from director to director?
Some might prepare and some might not.
It's hard. Well, that show was all exteriors, and so it's really the grip department, and we designed all these rigs that were always on standby, because you have the top talent and they need to look beautiful. You have, Jennifer Garner, Juliette Lewis, Ione Skye, like women of a certain age who you want to make beautiful, and so that gets hard on a schedule where it's like the sun is changing and you're all night, you're all daytime exterior. So I would just try to design it so that, okay, we have to shoot this way. I know it's going to be a little bit out of order. We may not be able to shoot in continuity, but it's going to look better for everyone. So that's a challenge. And I really learned a lot from shooting television because I was able to think very quickly on my feet and be prepared for these instances, so that when I got to, work with other A-listers, I was like, okay, I feel good. I know how to make them look good in this scenario, because I had cut my teeth shooting all these shows with no prep or very little prep. But I knew the tools that I needed to get there. So
I want to talk about then the difference between shooting television and a film you did called Life in a Year, which was quite a well-received feature film. It's really interesting. It's a very odd mix of a serious story and kind of very extreme, surreal kind of comedy. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that, how that film came about and how you sort of prepped it?
And how much prep did you have?
That was like 7-8 years ago. That was filmed in Toronto, so I needed to hire a crew. I didn't know much about Toronto crew at the time. So I interviewed a lot of people, and I think that's the key to success in shooting overseas and shooting internationally is getting the best crew. I wasn't allowed to bring anyone on that one. Mm-hmm. So I interviewed, and I was very lucky to have Terry Banting and Dean Stinchcombe as my first AC and my gaffer. And so they kind of filled in the rest of the crew for me. And they're incredible. And I actually just recently worked with Terry again as the director on a limited series I just finished, which is out now, called The Madness, which is out on Netflix now. So I've kept in touch. I usually keep in touch with all my gaffers, which is great because, it's such a collaboration. But so that prep, I can't remember if it was a month or two, but we scouted everything there, and I had a fantastic AD. So we were able to schedule to the light, which is always so important, right? When you have an AD who's on board and who cares about the visuals, it's so incredible. It's such a relief to know that they're not just shooting for their schedule, but they're actually shooting to help the cinematographer and director tell the best story possible and the best light possible. So I had a great team, and I think tonally, it's hard because you're trying to tell this story about a young woman, Cara Delevingne, who is dying from cancer. but there are all these moments of levity in there. So how do you balance that out? And we didn't shy away from bright colors. We didn't want it to be too grim. Even though I used a lot of sodium vapor in the storytelling, and um, we use very, I wouldn't say it's lit super comically. There are moments where it gets really dark, and I shoot a lot of silhouettes. But I thought that was important to the storytelling because it is a dark subject, although we are trying to make light of a lot of the moments and enjoy the life in her, the life that she is living now. So color palette was really important in that telling.
It was really interesting. I remember at one point they robbed a gas station, which kind of threw me a bit because I kind of think that seemed a bit out of tone. Can you remember the kind of conversations you had with the director about shooting the scenes? I mean, did you storyboard or did you just work out the kind of shots you do as you scouted locations? I mean, what was that process?
Yeah, no, I always use an app. I use Artemis or other, and I always take time of day, use the Sunseeker, and make sure that I have the master shot, the wide. Like, what can we do once we run out of light? Can we do the close-ups? Should we get this shot? Let's do this moving master at this time. We'll just rehearse, and then when the light is right, we'll do this shot. He came from a lot of comedy, and so it's all about timing and performance. But then just to be able to integrate those performances within the lighting in order to not have just like a bright, high key light and push um, is always a fun challenge for me because sometimes I tend to go really dark, and like in A Teacher, I went really, really dark because the material was so dark. And even in Palm Springs, like I know it's considered a sci-fi rom-com, but I tried not to light it like I don't want to say traditional comedy because there is a skill and an art to that as well. But, just leaning into the darker moments, I guess that's something I tend to grab. I don't know what that says about me. Maybe that's another therapy session. But I do love to play with contrast, even though the material can be comedic at times.
For Life in a Year, did you do storyboards? Did you do shot lists? Were most of the scenes planned out ahead of time? Was there any improv?
There was definitely improv in the performances, but we scouted everything and we tech scouted. Everything was designed in a way because of the tight schedule. I think shooting, I can't remember exactly what the budget was, definitely under 10 million, but you have to be prepared. And so it doesn't leave a lot of room for improv if you're going to if you're going to need these big lights and within these big, exterior spaces. We had a lot of night exteriors, so I had I had to design those. We had the LRX. We had to know where it was going to be parked and the time it would take to move it. So I had to design everything very carefully. So there wasn't improv in terms of shot design, but there was with performance.
How about there's quite a big night scene at the beginning, a club scene with a big crowd. I was interested in that. It seems a very big scene for what was, limited budget movie. How was that done? Was that an existing location? Did you go into some real situation, or did you have to light a set?
We had to. It was an abandoned factory. I think it's used often in Toronto locations, but that was like a big pre-light the night before because we had hundreds of extras. And I had a Techno crane and another camera. And I had 2 cameras on that one. I operated one. So we had to design it in a way because we had very limited time. And I added all the sodium vapor. I added the practical lights that you see in it, the fluorescent tubes I hung on the exterior of the buildings, augmented it with several condor placements with some 18Ks. But yeah, it was a big, big scene. And I wanted the wide shots because I wanted the scope of it. And so I had to light the space as opposed to the close-ups. And so that was important to get those big wide shots.
How do you think you learn to light. Do you think it's possible to learn? I mean, what did you learn at film school? And how did you learn lighting?
Well,
I'm always interested
is your
in how
favorite
people
question.
feel that they learn to light.
I have what is called a Roger Deakins lighting kit in my back
What is that?
in my back pocket.
I was told the other day by somebody who works in the AI business that they could actually do an algorithm that would be Roger Deakins lighting,
Yeah,
and I
that'll
wouldn't
happen.
have to leave home. It could just use the algorithm.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
It was literally, well, when you were the cinematographer-in-residence at UCLA, I think, James, you put together an envelope that said the Roger Deakins lighting kit, and it was, do you remember, a piece of foil?
Yeah, I do remember that.
A piece of foil
Yeah.
and a light bulb.
And a tiny little light bulb.
And so
You carry that everywhere, do you?
I carry it in my back pocket. It's shredded. The filament doesn't work. I mean, it's just every now and then makes me bleed. But yeah, I just learned from being on other people's sets, and by studying films and studying cinema, and just watching a lot of films and just seeing how I would react emotionally to it. And I light from a very emotional space. In Palm Springs, for example, again, even though it's like a sci-fi rom-com, I wanted Kristen Miliotti's character to feel like she was waking up in a dark place every morning, which is why I lit it in total silhouette. I put some atmosphere. I had a 9K, I think, outside the window. And she was in silhouette, and I remember Andy Samberg coming up to me and saying, "Is it a little dark?" I said, "Yeah, it is. It's very dark. It's very dark. It's a silhouette." And then I explained to him, and I said, "Here's why I'm lighting it like this. It's because we don't find out until 2/3 of the way into the film that she is waking up to having an affair with her sister's fiance who's getting married the next day. So that should not be lit very brightly, and it's a very dark place. And once she gets stuck in that time loop, we realize that she has to wake up to this guilt every day until she finds a way out of the situation, which is why I'm lighting it like this." And he goes, "Okay, cool. Makes sense." And I also shot it in anamorphic. I shot on the Panavision T-Series, and that was a choice that I also had to kind of fight for.
So these weren't things that you talked about in prep?
No, we did. I talked with the director, but Andy was not present in those conversations. Right? I love him. I love him. We have a great rapport still, but I don't think he was used to that kind of artistic choice for his projects. I don't know that he had ever actually shot anamorphic before, so it made him nervous.
And how do you work with your crew, particularly your gaffer and electrical crew? Are you very specific about the kind of lights and what you want, or do you allow the gaffer a lot of freedom and to choose the kind of lights he's going to use, and you just give a general sense of the look? I
usually build a lookbook for every show, and we talk about palette, and I work very closely. Some of my best friends are production designers. I love working. I love collaborating with production designers and costume designers and gaffers. But I'll share a lookbook with all of them, and I think the more people who see it, the better. I make everyone. Now I sound like a dictator. I love when everyone is able to read the script. And I want them to read it, and not just read it once. I want them to really understand the material and the story so that we can tell the story through lighting and composition and light and shadow. So it's really important that my camera assistant, who I had worked with for, since the early 2009, she was incredible. She was a secret weapon on set because she remembered the conversations that we had during our prep. And she would say, "Oh, Q, do you remember that moment that you talked about a long time ago? And you said you wanted to do this. Do you want to go on that lens because that is specific to that point of view?" I'm like, "Yes, let's get that ready." Like, she would know because we would talk about it. And the same thing with my gaffer. Like, I did this movie, The Night Stalker, and I wanted sodium vapor because it was in the 1970s. The whole movie took place, the series of events about the Night Stalker took place during the 70s. So I said, we need real sodium vapor. So he got real sodium vapor lights, and that was the look of the show. We could only afford like 6 heads, but I used them for everything, like outside windows. I wouldn't try to like match with gels or anything. I had to use those lights every time so that it had the texture and the color, the exact color temperature of sodium vapor. And I would put it here and there every time, he was going to stalk someone. And it just gave this feeling, even if it was deep in the background. We just run a Jenny and like a putt-putt and just put that one light way back there so that you could feel it. So yeah, I love when I can share my vision with everyone and everyone's on board and we're all on board to tell the same story. And it's so beautiful. And that's why I love filmmaking versus being a photojournalist where you're solo and you're out alone in the field. I love being with people. Yeah.
It's interesting. We've talked to stills photographers on this podcast series, actually, and I have 3 of the ones we've talked to have said they started shooting documentaries, but they couldn't stand collaborating with other people. They wanted to take the image themselves. And I really kind of sympathize with that. I too like collaboration. But if you're turning to directing now, don't you miss that? See, one thing I would really miss directing is that collaboration with a crew. I'm much more a crew person than I am a studio person, production person,
It's funny you say that because I say, not that I am at the top, but it's very lonely at the top because you don't have your crew anymore. You don't have that banter on set with your gaffer and your AC and your key grip and your dolly grip, and you're not setting up the shots, and there's not that constant communication. It's just silence in between the takes. Not silence, sorry. This like 752 people coming up to you asking you questions like, what do you think of this? And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of questions, but but it's not the same kind of camaraderie, right, that you have with your crew of so many years. I mean, I was rolling with the same crew for over a decade, and we did a lot of shows together. And I actually, over Thanksgiving, my DIT, whom I have worked with for over a decade, he was over here with his wife for Thanksgiving with a couple other friends and filmmakers and actors. But yeah, I do miss that very much, and I think. I just shot a commercial in Toronto for 10 days as a DP, and I was like, oh, yeah, this feels good. This feels good again. Even though it was a new crew because I wasn't able to bring anyone, it was an instant, like, I felt at home again. I felt very comfortable. I was operating the camera. I was shooting anamorphic. We had 10 great days together. It was beautiful. And it's actually, I think being a director now has helped me be a better DP, actually, because I now know, like, I'm not going to push back as hard if a director asks for something because I get it now.
You are there to serve the director's vision, not your vision.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm like, but the light, but it's okay. It's okay if the light's not perfect right now. You still have to get the shot in the moment and the performance. So
the performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I never push back about performance.
Yeah, I'm interested. You shot some episodes of a Star Wars TV series. How is that, and why that choice? It seems very different from all the other work you've been doing.
I had already directed, and I got this call for Star Wars, AHSOKA, and it was going to be a year. And I talked to my team, my agents and my managers, and I was like, listen, can you guys hang tight for a year on directing while I go DP this show? I think it's really important. I want to learn the technology. And this seems like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I get to work with incredible artists and ILM and these VFX, and I get to work on the volume, and I get to learn all that technology. I was very scared, mind you, because I hadn't done anything like that to that extent. I had done, the first time I did LEDs was on a show called Unbelievable, and that was a Netflix Limited about a woman who was sexually assaulted and no one believed her. It's based on a true story. But in that show, we used the car LED stage. And that was my first time using that poor man's process with an LED stage. So that was the extent of like what I had worked with regards to any type of LED screen work. And it was really great and a great experience. And I learned so much about it. And I had done it several times since, but only with car work. I hadn't done anything with the full 360-degree volume with the ceiling. And so I figured this is going to be a game changer for me. And I get to learn this technology. And I love Star Wars. I mean, my son was born on May 4th. So it just seemed like fate. Like I should do this for my son. And so I did it, and it was very scary because I had to learn everything, and it was incredible. I absolutely love that experience. It's kind of ironic because one of the episodes was not shot on the LED screen at all. It was all gray screen and green screen and blue screen, and that was the Anakin Skywalker episode where he comes back in I don't want to say a flashback because it's a little more surreal than that, but he comes back and we revisit all these different battles that he took AHSOKA on as a young child. And so we had to we couldn't use the LED screens because we wanted a lot of smoke. And once you put smoke in a volume, it doesn't work anymore. So I did all these tests. I shot all these tests, and we decided that we would just shoot on gray screen because with a lot of atmosphere, if you build enough, you can't even see past, however many feet. And we had the huge stages. So, and the other thing I wanted to do was control the lighting in camera. So I built all the lighting effects with the board to go from like these very fuchsia hues to orange and to violet and blue. So that was all done in camera with many, many, many space lights and practical and also practical effects. You can't really bring fire and explosions into a volume stage. And I wanted those practical effects to really feel on the characters, and also like for the actors to viscerally respond to. I didn't think about that at the time, but like once we did it, we're like, oh wow, that like they really react to it, and the timing is perfect. Like that's hard to replicate with green screen or blue screen, right? It's like a fire effect. It's like, oh gosh, you're gonna really react because like, how close is it to me?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But do you think the volume and the LED projection, how do you think that's going to challenge filmmaking in the future?
Oh boy. I mean, I get asked this question a lot. Like, how was your experience on the volume? I'm not quite sure how to answer it because I loved my time on it, but I also hated it. It's you feel very claustrophobic because as soon as you want to step outside the 50 feet, 60 feet, you can't, because then you're outside the volume. And so you're forced into using wider lenses and lose some of the scope. And you just start to feel at the subconscious level that you're stuck in a box a little bit, right? And I feel like no matter how much they expand the set, it can still feel a little bit claustrophobic. And I really struggled to find ways to make it cinematic without, within the confines of our sets. And that was hard. You're like, more foreground, okay, more set dressing to feel depth and stuff. But then it kind of feels to me a little bit artificial at times, in the way that when you shoot wide open, if the background blurs too much, it starts to feel a little bit green screeny to me. So a lot of times, like when I'm shooting exteriors, I'm like, I don't want to shoot wide open because we're in this beautiful topography and I want to see the water rippling behind you. I don't want it just to be a mush. Even if I'm shooting on like a 32 or 35 close to an actor and the sea is behind them, I don't necessarily want to shoot wide open. I want to shoot maybe at a 4 or a 5/6 so that I can feel some of that texture and that depth moving behind. And I feel like that can be said about the volume at times. It's easy to just blur everything in the background, but then that's just a cheat, and that's what they did back in television in the 80s, or shoot wider aperture so you don't see the seams in the sets. Right. This time you want, yeah.
Or when they did back projection on set, back projection in the 40s and 50s, yeah.
Yeah, right. So you want to see the set, that's the mise en scène. You want to experience the context of this world. And sometimes if you just have a figure standing in an empty volume with the beautiful backdrop, don't get me wrong, we have the artists of the highest caliber creating these gorgeous sets, but there's something about it still, even if you can't really place your finger on it.
In what you're doing now as a director, though, do you find that you get push back from, the production company, the producers, whoever that may be, if you want to shoot something on location for real? Do you find that sometimes you get pushed back?
I think that can be true of even, working on any kind of show or feature. I've been pretty fortunate, I feel, that this year I've worked mostly on location. I'm working in the limited series space, and we had incredible gigantic sets on stage at Steiner for 2 shows ago this summer. But we had a lot of location work. We went to the ocean. I had a technocrane. We went on a ferry. We, had this beautiful mansion on the edge of a cliff. I was able to use drone, and I feel like it's shot very much like a feature film. We had a very large budget, and even though we only still had 12 or 13 days per episode, I was able to make the most out of it by sometimes sending a second unit out to get drone footage or B-roll footage. So just to expand the scope, because once you're on stage, of course, you're on stage. But we had an incredible production designer, John Pano, who had done The Last of Us. And it was just really special. And that was my second collaboration with the showrunner, Molly Smith-Metzler, whom I did MAID with. And that brings us full circle back to John Wells.
Hey, good.
Well, good. Yeah.
What have we missed talking about?
Bread, but we don't need to talk about that.
Bread, yes.
Well, thank you so much again, James and
thank
Roger.
you.
It's
thank you.
Such an honor.
Been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.